Hello, and welcome to my YouTube channel, where I plan to talk about things that I love, which usually fall into a very nerdy category, but I'm not ashamed of it. And I hope you enjoy what I have to say. Today we're going to talk about my personal favorite IP, or at least one of them, which is Warhammer 40,000. In specific, we're going to talk about Space Marines. Usually people start with like the Horus Heresy and all that good stuff, but we're going to start with the Emperor's Angels themselves. The Space Marines were designed by the Emperor himself to be his first and last line of defense. They were created during the Great Crusade. At that time, humanity was scattered across the galaxy, and many of its worlds were ruled by alien races or were in chaos. The Emperor, a superhuman being with vast psychic powers, envisioned the creation of an army that could conquer the galaxy and unite all of humanity under one banner. They come from Gene Seed, that comes from their Primarchs. Primarchs are essentially demigods. They're the Emperor's children. Literally. That's also a Space Marine chapter, but we'll get to that at some point. And each Primarch has a Gene Seed, and then the Gene Seed is what they use for like the template for each Space Marine chapter, which leads to very different chapters with very different strengths and I would say weaknesses, but they don't have very many. They're immune to most temperatures, even extreme ones. They know no fear. They move fast like a predator, but are strong enough to do great feats. And it's hard to find obstacles to get in their way that they can't move themselves. I mean, if you've seen the secret level episodes, at one point Titus, an Ultramarine, literally runs through a truck while he's fighting heretics. With chainsword and bolter in hand, they continue to defend the Imperium of mankind on many different fronts, on many different worlds, with many different conditions and many different enemies. The Emperor is their god, and purging the Xenos and cleansing the heretic are their worship, with every bolter round being a fervent prayer. The transformation process for a Space Marine alters the body dramatically. Space Marines are taller, stronger, and faster than normal humans. Their bones are reinforced and their muscles are enhanced, enabling them to lift enormous weights. One of the most iconic features of a Space Marine is their power armor, a suit of highly advanced, near indestructible technology. The armor enhances their strength and agility and provides protection against most forms of weaponry. It is powered by a miniature reactor that allows the Marine to go into battle for hours or even days without tiring. They also usually don't need very much sleep, if any at all. The helmet is equipped with advanced sensors, allowing them to see in different spectrums and communicate across vast distances. But even without the helmet, they have amazing hearing, eyesight, smell. They also have the ability to eat the flesh of the fallen enemy and gain some of its knowledge. Some of them can even spit acid in case they find themselves in a situation where such a thing could get them like out of I guess you could say handcuffs or chains. They have a little need for food. Some don't seem not to eat very much at all, but others do feast, such as the Space Wolves. Very Norse themed chapter. They have great feasts and meat halls, or their equivalent of it, and drink an alcohol that was strong enough to kill a normal human. But many other chapters eat the bare minimum, like protein sticks and gruel, among other things. And then you have some, such as the Blood Angels, who are essentially space vampires that can drink the blood of their enemies and maybe even eat them whole, depending on which chapter and successor chapter you're referring to. The Blood Angels themselves exercising great control over what they call the Red Thirst and the Black Rage, as much as they can anyways, whereas the Flesh Terrors and other chapters have given in to the Red Thirst, using it as a weapon in many confrontations. Almost all, probably. There are 20 original chapters of Space Marines, with the 2nd and 11th being erased from the history books. No one's quite sure what happened to them, whether they got turn to chaos very early on and purge for it, or heretical, or otherwise. No one really knows, and no one really knows why no one knows. But there are the Dark Angels, which are essentially your knights, and there are the Blood Angels, like I mentioned, are space vampires, and there are the Emperor's Children, which before turning to chaos were very driven by perfection, and after turning to chaos are overdriven by perfection and have succumbed to drug use and indulgences to the point where they don't even resemble their former selves. And then you have the Space Wolves, the Viking chapter, Space Vikings. They're pretty cool. Granted, they're not exactly my favorite chapter. I'm not going to dive too far into that because it seems to be the fun thing to do by hating on the Space Wolves. But they do need to cool it on the wolves a little bit. But the idea is pretty neat, in my opinion. I mean, who doesn't love Vikings? Personal favorite chapter are the Dark Angels. The first, the sons of Lionel Johnson. The beast pretending to be a man. They're night themed. They have the honor of having the first bulwarks, which is essentially a space marine with a big sword and a big shield, a power sword, which generates a field around it that slices through enemies like a hot knife through butter. I know I'm not exactly naming them off in proper order. Eventually I will do a video on the actual order that they come in. But anyway, and then you have the Salamanders, your big green boys, dragon themed, pretty sick looking armor. They're very loving. They're honestly probably the only chapter of Space Marines that actually give a shit about regular humans, at least to enough extent to risk their own asses for them on a pretty regular basis. They're the Hammer Boys. They love their big hammers, and they love their flamers. Their Primarch is Vulcan, who is the huggiest boy, and is also perpetual, which is something else I'll touch on in a later video. Another neat chapter is the Iron Fist. They're not Mechanicus based, the Mechanicus being uh, a sect of basically machine cultists who don't believe in the heretical AI, but still replace their body parts and organs with machines as long as some part of them stays organic. It's technically not heresy, which is something else I'll touch on. But the Iron Hands are essentially a Space Marine version of that. Not to such an extreme extent, but they do firmly believe in their augmentations, mechanical augmentations, and things of that nature. They have Tech Marines, not that other chapters don't, but the Iron Hands are very heavy with it. And it's a pretty cool concept. The next chapter I'm going to mention, the founding chapter anyways, is the Imperial Fists. The boys you want to call if you need to fortify something. And I'm not the biggest fan of their banana colored armor. Yellow just isn't my thing, but I do think they're pretty cool for a chapter. Their Primarch being Dorn. Dorn was who the Emperor called when the Horus Heresy made its way to Earth, and he needed someone to defend the wall. But we'll talk about the Horus Heresy eventually. Another chapter that I think is super neat, because I'm a big Psyker fan, is the Thousand Sons. Essentially an entire Space Marine chapter of Psykers that are Space Marines. Not quite the same as Librarians, which are Psyker Space Marines that can be found in most chapters, unless you're a Space Wolf, in which case they have the Rune Priest, which is essentially the same thing as a Librarian, but the Space Wolves are extremely against Psykers. So instead of having Librarians, they have Rune Priests, but it's the same thing. Granted, their Psyker abilities are pretty cool, and usually Psyker abilities, or rather Librarian abilities, vary by each chapter. But the Thousand Sons are an entire chapter of Psykers. They all have some amount of ability. And they used to have different schools before falling to Chaos. And now that they fell to Chaos, they probably still have different schools. But most of them are dust walking around in power armor. And eventually I'll get to all that too. Another chapter with a very interesting chapter-wide ability is the Raven Guard. Wearing black armor, which I'm a big fan of black, so they already got me hooked. But they also have the ability to essentially turn invisible, disappearing in the shadows, and sometimes in the shadows that aren't even really supposed to be there. Their Primarch Corvus Corax is currently running around the warp as a crow demon, harassing the heretical Primarchs that still live. Then you have the Night Lords and their Primarch Conrad Curze. Essentially fearmongers. The way they operate is also somewhat in stealth, not quite to the extent of the Raven Guard, because there's been occasions where they themselves were impressed by how stealthy the Raven Guard were. But the Night Lords rule with fear. If they're trying to take a planet or a battlefield, they'll infiltrate, take control of broadcasting channels and high up authority with little to no conflict with the direct military forces of whatever faction or planet they may be trying to take. And then they'll cut the skin off of them while they're alive, peel their fingernails back, and whatever kind of gruesome and grotesque, painful things you could think of. But while they do it, they'll broadcast it to the whole planet, winning battles with very little actual conflict by striking fear into the hearts of every being on the planet. On the opposite side of the coin of the Imperial Fists are the Iron Warriors, essentially siege versus fortify. The Iron Warriors were what the Emperor always called to lay siege to a planet, unendingly almost. Sometimes even to the point where it kind of felt like he forgot he sent them there, which led to Perturabo's daddy issues down the line, and him ultimately turning to Chaos. The Iron Warriors have a pretty cool armor scheme. It's like a kind of like a gunmetal, kind of silver with like black and yellow caution stripes on their pauldrons. And they are masters of siege warfare. Now, if you're looking for a chapter that wants to go fast, look no further than the White Scars. Basically Mongolian-themed space marines that all love to ride their big space marine motorcycles and essentially operate in battle the same way that the Mongols used to, coming in hitting fast and hard and then pulling out without taking very little losses. Are you an angry person? Do you just want to rage out sometimes? Then the perfect chapter for you would be the World Eaters and their Primarch Angron. I mean, he basically has anger in his name. They're essentially berserkers and space marines that just jump headfirst into combat. Granted, they used to be very tactical and less risky, but more efficient. But once they were reunited with their Primarch Angron, who had the Butcher's Nail implanted into his brain, which basically made it to where if he wasn't fighting or angry, he was in constant pain. When they were reunited with him, he decided it would be a good idea for all of them to follow suit and have Butcher's Nails like Dad does, leading to all of them getting the implants, despite some friction and people pushing back. And now they've turned to Chaos as well. So basically, all they do is fight. And if they're not fighting, then they're mad about it. Are you a person who enjoys being sick all the time, runny noses, maybe a head cold, ear infection? You like the sound of flies buzzing around? You like the smell of farts and the sight of vomit? Then the Plague Marines are for you, with their Primarch Mortarion, who literally seeps noxious fumes constantly. The Plague Guard have turned to Chaos, or Death Guard rather, have turned to Chaos, and the chaos god Nurgle, who is the god of life and death, rot and decay, viruses, pestilence, all that fun stuff. Plagues. And the Death Guard embody that, with every Marine in the company having grotesques, growths, and bulges, and tentacles where tentacles shouldn't be, and extra mouths, and flies coming out of their orifices, and just literally spreading plagues and viruses with every step they take. Then the Death Guard are perfect for you. Do you ever think about going so deep undercover that you honestly forget which side you're on? Are sabotage and espionage your forte? Well then look at the Alpha Legion, with their Primarch Alpharius and Omegon. The Hydra Dominatus, their masters at infiltration, subterfuge, and just general spy work. I love the way their armor looks. It's a very interesting shade of like blue-green with like green details. And their Hydra symbol that they wear on their pauldrons is super cool too. And they almost have like a fish scale look to them. And nobody really knows what side they're on. Not even them. But all we know is they're always up to something, even if they're not exactly sure what that something is. Obviously, this is a setting very based on religious fanaticism, in case you haven't noticed. But if that's something that you jive with and you want to take it to another level, then the Word Bearers are the perfect legion for you. With their Primarch Lorgar being the one who started the religion that's based around the Emperor, which is the doctrine of the Empyrean in the current setting. These guys take religion to a whole nother level. And now they've turned to chaos, worshipping all the chaos gods, maybe favoring one over the other depending on the Space Marine in question. But either way, they're worshipping something. And the last of the first founding chapters that I'm going to mention, because it's the last one out of the 20, is the Luna Wolves, the Sons of Horus, whose Primarch is, you guessed it, Horus. Horus D. Heresy. Horus Lupercal. The Lunar Wolves and their Primarch were most favored by the Emperor, with Horus himself being named the War Master in the Emperor's stead when he disappeared to work on his Webway project, leaving Horus to run the Imperium and the Great Crusades, which led to some friction between him and his brothers, who envied his position, and him taking a pretty heavy load on his shoulders, wondering why the Emperor left him with such a task, with no great explanation, led to him turning to chaos. The Lunar Wolves turning to chaos. Which, it is a funny story how that happened, but I'll tell you that another time. But these guys led the Horus Heresy and led to other chapters that turned to heretics on the crusade to Terra, almost overtaking the Emperor and destroying the Imperium as a whole. But either way, plunging it into what it is now, a mess. The Lunar Wolves were excellent Space Marines. They still are excellent Space Marines, but now they're the Black Legion, basically a Chaos Undivided Legion of Space Marines led by Abaddon in Horus's stead, because the Emperor smacked that boy out of existence. And Abaddon doesn't worship any Chaos gods. He takes advantage of their vying for his interests from time to time to get what he wants, but he hasn't technically succumbed to any of them. And with that, that's all of the original 20 chapters of Space Marines. Granted, there are thousands of successor chapters with thousands of different versions of Space Marines. Pretty much any flavor you're looking for, they got it. With that being different Chaos factions, chapters rather, and different Loyalist chapters. If you want to be if you want religious fervor, but on the good side, look at the Black Templars. If you want to be an Imperial Fist, but instead of just fortifying, you're a little more aggressive, then look no further than the Crimson Fists. Flesh Tears, so on and so forth. But with all that being said, I just wanted to shed some light on Space Marines. Not that they don't get enough love. Obviously, they're the poster boys of the whole franchise. But they are neat. I mean, it's the rule of cool. They were not intended to lead humanity, but to defend it, sometimes even from itself. Potential Space Marines are usually but not always recruited from the worlds where a chapter has established its fortress monastery, although some chapters are known to recruit from a collection of different worlds in an area of space they protect or frequent. Recruiting methods vary from chapter to chapter. Some select their neophytes from feral tribes roaming the surface of inhospitable worlds, while others draw upon eager volunteers who have been groomed from birth to become an Astartes. They have a list of organs implanted when they're young, so they can grow big and strong to fight for the Emperor. First one being the secondary heart. Basically increases blood supply and pumping capacity. Should the first heart fail, the second one will take over. Next is the Osmadula, the Iron Heart. It greatly strengthens and accelerates the growth of a skeleton of a Space Marine by inducing his bones to absorb a ceramic-based mineral administered in every Astartes neophyte's diet. Within 2 standard years after the surgery, the Space Marine skeleton will be larger and exponentially stronger than a normal man's, with growth having stopped around 7 to 7.5 feet. The next organ is the Bascopia, the Forge of Strength, implanted in the chest cavity. It bolsters skeleton muscular development and muscle fiber density throughout the Astartes body to increase physical strength by unleashing a wave of human growth hormones. Then there's the Hemastaman. I might not be saying that right. Hemastaman? The Blood Maker. Implanted into the main blood vessel like the aorta, femoral artery, or the vena cava, the Hemastaman alters an Astartes blood biochemical composition to carry oxygen and nutrients more efficiently. Then there's a Lehrman's organ, the Healer, shaped like the human liver, but only the size of a golf ball. It's placed within the chest cavity and creates synthetic biological cells known as Lehrman cells. Basically, they cause any wounds the Astartes may get to form in the scar tissue way faster than they normally would, so he doesn't bleed out and can start healing the process way faster. And the list of organs goes on and on. There are 18 in total for a regular Astartes, and 19 rather, and there are 3 more in the case of a Primaris, adding up to a total of 22. Types of Space Marines, such as the Librarian I mentioned earlier, and the ones who wear Terminator armor, are all built to serve a different purpose. There's a long list of different versions of that, which I will eventually go over. And like I said, they're all designed for one thing or another, and excel greatly at it. They shall be my finest warriors, these men who have given themselves to me. Like clay, I shall mold them, and in the furnace of war I shall forge them. They shall be of iron will and steely sinew. In great armor I shall clad them, and with the mightiest weapons shall they be armed. They will be untouched by plague or disease, no sickness shall blight them. They shall have such tactics, strategies, and machines that no foe will best them in battle. They are my bulwark against the terror. They are the defenders of humanity. They are my Space Marines, and they shall know no fear. Said by the Emperor of Mankind himself. The Space Marines put it all on the line every time. Designed to be the ultimate war machines. They come into battle and they don't fight, they win. And if they don't win, then they make sure the enemy felt it. And usually everyone loses. They're fearless, fierce, and ferocious. Fiery, fervent, just downright not a good thing to see if you're on the enemy side. Suffer not the Xenos to live, purge the heretic, cleanse the mutant. Space Marines live and die for the Imperium of Man and the Emperor of Mankind, and they wouldn't have it any other way. Thank you for watching. and I hope you enjoyed my video.